Years ago, like back in the 90s, I bought this really cheap ferrous, non-ferrous metal detector from Harbor Freight. And then a friend of mine gave me an old vintage Fisher metal detector. And metal detectors back in the day basically would come out and you had a handle. They didn't have an armrest to support your arm while you were metal detecting for an extended amount of time. But that Harbor Freight one was so light, I like to use that and hardly use the Fisher. But the problem is that it was horrendous and not very good, and I had to keep recalibrating it, and it did lousy at the beach, which is where most people metal detect. Anyway, I ended up deciding I needed a new metal detector, and they made some nice foldable ones on Amazon, which I saw, but unfortunately, when I bought one, it didn't do the job. The coil was enormous, and you had to put it on all metals in order for it to show you where the gold is. Plus, it didn't seem to work very well, so it was too heavy, bulky, so I decided to return it and I bought this Garrett. And this one doesn't have a removable armrest, and it's just so bulky. And then when you try to extend this with these pins, you can pull and then it can tug on this and over time ruin it. So I'm like, why not make a telescoping metal detector? STEM. And I had an old selfie stick, but the little things that you peel to slide started to break. And I discovered these telescoping ones. And this one, look how small it is. And these are off Amazon. And they telescope for really long, more than you need. So you could actually have it go this way. And consequently, I want to use this as a stem. This is metal. It feels cool to the touch. This is, I'm not sure if it's an alloy or a plastic. It looks more like a plastic. But it shouldn't make a difference because you move the metal detector over the metal. It has to be in motion in order to detect it. So just because this is aluminum should make no difference along with a metal 1/4-inch machine thread screw. And what's nice is this has a fuller on the edges so you can keep it straight. It doesn't turn and oscillate. Turn and rotate. So it adds stability as well. And it is very light, lighter than this. Now, why do I want to do that? Not just for portability, but the reality is if you don't sit there for an entire day metal detecting, you don't need the armrest. Plus, the straps to strap it on your arm. Every time you hear metal and you want to dig something, you have to take it off to dig. This is useless. Of course, if you're holding this for hours on end, waving it around, it may help, but if you wave it around for a little bit, you find something to dig up, you set it down, then you put it back on, this doesn't really do much in my opinion. So I wanted a metal detector without an armrest and something that can easily fit in the backpack, hence a telescoping selfie stick. So now let's show you how I'm going to adapt the metal detector to the selfie stick. Now, before we adapt this metal detector, we need to have something to compare with to see if it's going to make a difference having that stem. So I'm going to turn this on and ignore this wet spot. This wet spot is basically we've had rain and a hurricane moving through, but I'm going to hover this. So you can see where on the floor there's some metal that's triggering the metal detector. So with that, now I have something to compare with the readapting of it. There are a couple of rubber gaskets in here and the stem that were adapted to the coil. And I could always get a new one to use and keep this with the old stem. I could always buy a new stem end and just chop it and slip that over the tip of the selfie stick. These are different ways to do, but for now I'm just going to use a PVC pipe plug to adapt because that actually is a way to save money and reuse the stem. But I'm going to keep these rubber gaskets in there. I'm going to do something else. So looking at the coil, I found a pipe plug that will fit in here between the edges of the coil, the stem, and then the bolts. So I'm basically going to adapt this. Well, one like it. This is made by Charlotte Pipe. I noticed the Lasco ones are a little longer and would do a little better. I lined it up with the coil of the metal detector to know where to drill, and I lined it up to know with the center. So using roughly a 7/32 bit or something around there, which is, you want to find a bit that's around the size needed for a 1/4 inch machine screw thread to attach onto the selfie stick, but you want it to be a little tighter so it's a good snug fit because of the purpose you're doing. So I'm lining this up. That's good. So now I'm going to turn this on. So I was drilling to the side of the hole I marked, but I realized I marked it lined up with the flat edge. So now I have to realign this. Okay, perfecta. Having the Lasco one drilled, and when I compare them, you can see this is thicker, which may be actually better for the screw thread, and a little longer, which actually works better because you'd see where the hole would be like right at the edge there. So it's good I used the Lasco one compared to that. So that's something to consider when buying a PVC plug to adapt your metal detector to a telescoping stem. So with the holes drilled, I'm running this thread through the hole, and I made this a smidgen tighter than it needs to be because I want to make sure it's going to be tight enough, and it looks like it's a little askew, which shouldn't be that way considering, no, it's actually straight. It's off center a little. So I'm bummed out about that, but it's not going to really make a difference at the bottom. It's just, I prefer it to be that way. Now I want to make sure these holes here and here are lined up with that fuller. So I'm going to turn this tight enough to line it up. Now for gaskets, I have some gaskets I made using self-adhesive craft foam. So I'm going to take the sticker off and make sure this lines up pretty well right there, and do the same on that and line it up on the other side over the barcode. And in case anyone's wondering how to make these gaskets, I basically took some craft punches and I use a 9.8mm and a 5/8, and I have some self-adhesive craft foam. You can get these from Hobby Lobby, Michaels. And what I did was I first took the smaller one and I punched the holes. So let's use the corner here. So I went and I punched the hole, and then I took the larger one, slid it so I can line up the hole, and punched. And this one sticks a little bit, so I'll use a pen to poke it through. But this is how you can make these gaskets if need be. A simple way to make a quick gasket. So attaching it, you can see that the coil is pretty snug on there. I can actually tighten this a little more, and it works really well. So that's the nice thing about it. So now I'm good to go to attach the part to the top. Looking at the selfie stick, this main shaft is thicker in diameter than this shaft here, and it gets smaller as you telescope. And then looking at the metal detector, when you look at this shaft here, it's commensurate with this thickness and not this one. This is too thick to take this apart and clamp onto here. So one option, which I do not wish to employ, is to clamp it at the end of this shaft. Then I can squeeze it into there just to get it shrunk, but it's still going to be too long as opposed to shrinking in all the way and being more compact. So I'm going to get this to go on this outer part or above it as opposed to on the other shaft so that I can have this telescope as small as possible. Looking at the shaft, to remove the housing that holds the computer for the metal detector, you have two Phillips heads, but then you have two star bits. I did not have one small enough, so I had to order it and wait a few days, but now I have one that fits. So in case anyone's wondering, it required a T6 star bit to open these. Just to validate, you can see the computer housing, and it's smaller than that and about that diameter, and maybe even the one a little smaller. So this will be adapted to fit on top of this one. So I concluded that this PVC pipe is a little thicker than I want, so I'm going with a piece of PEX, which is a little thinner than I want, but it's easier to make it thicker than to make the pipe thinner. So I don't need pilot holes for those because they're just going into the stem on the housing of the computer, but I can now screw these in and look, yay. Don't want to strip the head, so I have to be careful. So I took this back apart because I am going to turn it around and do one other thing. So I have this turned around. I'm going to cut this about here and then cut that about here. So when this is on, I want it to extend a little beyond that and a little beyond here only. And you will see why. So to do this, now that I have an idea of where it's going, I'm going to take my marker and actually mark it, and I'm going to have it from here and from here. So that's where I'm going to cut it, just around that area. And now with this marked, I'm actually going to mark a couple holes in the center of where the seam is, and that's going to be further up. I'm actually going to put it a little lower. So as you can see, this drill bit is just perfect for this zip tie. So this is where finding my pipe cutter would have proved handy. So I took a piece of craft foam. This is non-self-adhesive, and it's basically going to wrap around. I cut it to the right diameter to wrap around. So now I'm going to drill some holes in this. I could use circle punches only for these two, but I'm just going to run a drill from one side to the other. So then these holes will line up nicely. I'm going to drill through there and here. Perfect. And then what I'm going to do next is take the scissors. I have the areas marked, and I'm just going to cut it by hand because it's just simpler. So now that I have this, I'm going to stick this like so. So I have this in there clamped, and I got this as close as I could, and now I can run the screws. When you look at the stick, and then here is the grip, and this is part of the top outer shaft, I can't just mount this on here because it's plastic and it's going to slide. So I wanted this seam lined at the top. I just think it looks better from the underside. And I use zip ties to hold it securely. Now I can put this piece in here, but I have to make sure the bottom is in far enough as well. So now that I have this, I can actually run the zip tie through here. And looking at the fuller, I want to make sure this is going to be aligned properly with the fuller. So now it's snug on both ends, and I have a metal detector lined up. So now I'm assembling this, and then we'll test it out. So here it is. And now we can test it out. So it is telescoping, but does it work? So the fact that the pole is metal doesn't make a difference because it's moving with the coil. It's not moving in flux with the coil to where it's not affecting anything. And what's nice about this metal detector is I can adjust the sensitivity if need be. So now let's test it out. Recollect this area here was wet when I started this, and I had to put an end to it until I can get what I needed. So I have this, I never messed with the setting, and I didn't zero last time, and I'm not going to zero now, and let's test it out. So I get some nice strong signals in the silver range. I wish I could dig through the floor in the garage and see what they buried, but it works, and it's telescoping. Out. So here is my metal detector. I have a handle that I can hold it with, and it came with this thing. So I have a little screw thing I can screw in here, and then I can strap it on with a carabiner and then strap it onto my belt, because what's nice is it collapses and is really small. So now I can take this anywhere I wanted, and I was able to prove that it's doable and that it works. So that's the more important thing. So then I can stretch it out, stretch from there, and then shrink this if I need to get it any longer. And this is pretty solid and rigid, so it works really well. So I have this book bag from the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention from the North Carolina Department of Public Safety. Now, I recently acquired this because someone was getting rid of it at work. And in my last job, actually, I had to get to go into the prisons. So I'd like to tell people I've never been arrested, but I have been sent to prisons. And, you know, in prisons, they have metal detectors before you go in. So I found this book bag fitting for a place to tote this. So in here, I have a pocket, and I have a pinpointer, another pinpointer. This was a cheap freebie when I bought the metal detector, and I bought the other one off Amazon, which is a cheap one, but a good one. And then I have my little scoop, which I forgot to take with me last time I went to the beach, along with a probe if I need to use it. So I have all this gear in here. I really don't use headphones, but if you do, headphones do fit in here. So the question is, can I collapse this and fit it in that book bag? So let's see. And I can. So I put a relic bag to collect the things in, and I now have a book bag that I can quickly throw in my car with my metal detecting gear. Isn't that great? So this carabiner is a little small, but I can even attach it to other gear if I desire to, and now I can walk around with my hands free and still have the detector if I don't have my book bag. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Happy detecting.